Lacey up the middle. Lacey's in the clear. It's a foot race. The Hurricanes cannot run him down. A lightning strike for Ole Miss. Tony has space. Malachi Tony still running. Touchdown Miami. Electric with the ball in his hands.
This is the CFF Sites Preseason Preview Series, Part 3. We're in the wide receivers. My name's Joe DeSalvo, my partner, Mike Bainbridge, sitting across from me. Mike, here we are. We've done quarterbacks. We've knocked out running backs. We're at receivers now. We're at the end of July, getting ready to kick off the month of August. What that means is we have 4 draft weekends before the start of the season, week 0. So starting next week, we're looking to get into the 3 biggest draft weekends of the year leading up to the season, which I say all the time, have your drafts as late as possible, get as much intel, news, insight as possible. But after we do this show, we're going to cover tight ends too. We'll have quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and then starting next week, everybody starts opening up preseason camp. So there's going to be a lot of news and tidbits that come in. So much like we did last year, we're going to be throwing out some quick shows. Who are our risers? Who are our fallers? Who are we staying away from? Where are our eyes going to be throughout camp, right? And if you're not at the CFF site and have that All-American or Heisman tier, you've got to get in. You've got Discord access, and we've got channels for all the teams. We've got the game day channels. And really, that Discord is where you want to be as we get into the season. Because, look, we can't take all the credit. The community, the college fantasy football community is our followers, our subscribers, they're as good at finding news and tidbits out, sometimes as good as we are, and sometimes faster. And so it helps to have that community Discord server, particularly as we get into the season when folks have to make those game day roster decisions, Mike. But things are really heating up, and here we are, receivers, third of the bunch. And we're going to close out the positional stuff with this show. Anything to add on top of that intro, man?
Yeah, I was just going to say, there was, all those week 0 teams have started for the most part preseason camp. So we've already posted a few news and notes that we've seen online with the first couple practices with some of those teams. TCU's practicing, Florida State is, North Carolina, both of the North Carolinas, Tar Heels and Wolfpack. We posted some notes in there, so make sure you've signed up, get in the Discord, because those news and notes are becoming hot and heavy here in the coming weeks.
Yeah, look, we're gonna approach this like we have the other shows. We're gonna talk about our strategy at receiver. We're gonna talk about who's some of the guys we like at the top, who we're shying away from, who are some of those middle, late round picks that we really like. We're also gonna get into we're gonna touch on tight ends a little bit as well. And then before we close this out, we're just going to kind of round out the show and kind of rattle off a few of the schools that we're kind of keeping close eyes on, where there's value at wide receiver 1, and there needs to be some things that still need to be sorted or confirmed for us, right? So that's what we'll do. And I don't think it's really too much of a mystery, because you and I have kind of teased the wide receiver strategy as we've gotten into the quarterbacks and the running backs. And I'm just going to throw out the obvious. In the P4, you've got Jeremiah Smith, you've got Malachi Tony, and then if you're in full FBS mode, I think there's really, both of us agree. You've got Jeremiah Smith, Malachi Tony. You've also got Bo Sparks at Texas State and Easton Messer at FAU, particularly in a PPR league. He's a PPR magnet. Those are probably pretty rock solid top 4 right there, right? What is the strategy beyond those top 4, man?
Well, I would say with the top 4, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I really feel like it's beneficial to lock down that anchor wide receiver among those top four, because while I think you can poke holes in just about every single player on every single team in college fantasy football, those four feel about as locked in as a top tier I feel like that we've had in the past few years. So, and in terms of preference, like I have Jeremiah Smith and Malachi Tony ranked 1, 2. But I have no qualms of any of the top four, whomever you want to pick. I did take Easton Messer in the Kings Classic. That was full point PPR. I just feel like there's some upside there with that Florida Atlantic offense. But honestly, if you tell me you have any of those four ranked like in a certain order, I can't really question that at all, really.
I mean, really, we're splitting hairs. Look,
Yeah.
I'll make an announcement, man. I just made a switch 60 minutes before we hit the record button, so I'll break it now. I moved Malachi Tony to 1 and bumped Jeremiah Smith down to 2 for me. I moved Tony to 1. I just
There's some late news that I missed.
well, you know what? I just think with the, I just know Shannon Dawson. I know he's going to get Malachi Tony touches. I know Jeremiah Smith's going to get his. I just look at the offensive coordinator for Ohio State. I mean, he's not known for airing it out. We know Jeremiah Smith's going to get his, though. He's going to eat. But I just love the way that Dawson is going to get Tony the ball in multiple formations. And dare I say, sleeper dark horse for Heisman. I saw the odds this past weekend and I was like, maybe, maybe.
Well, I mean, the way that they use him as a running back and a quarterback, I mean, he's got that potential, right?
I mean, look, am I really breaking anything from swapping 1 and 2?
No.
No. But yeah, we did for the CFF site with the industry guys. I think I have Jeremiah Smith in one draft and Malachi Tony in the other. So I mean, really, we're
Honestly,
splitting
yeah.
hairs.
I mean, that's what I've done. I've done more drafts than you, but I've really spread it across the board. I have Jeremiah Smith shares. I have Tony and Bo Sparks and Easton Messer. I've really kind of sprayed across the board with those four in probably 20 or 25 drafts this offseason, just because I want a piece of all, in either direction there.
We can argue, or we could sit here and debate, or probably agree that those top 4 guys, you if you like them, go get them, right? Wherever you're at. Once when we get past those 4 guys, Mike, from a strategy standpoint in drafts, what have you done?
Well, Kings Classic, just because that's my most recent draft. I had the 1-1. I landed Messer at the first spot. I took David Amador at what was that? The end of the start of the 4th round. And I felt pretty good about that strategy, and then I just waited too long, and I did not feel comfortable. It's a redraft, the Kings Classic, and then I waited till about round 15 after that to land my wide receiver 3, and I didn't feel great about that coming out of the out of that draft. So I like locking down that anchor wide receiver, maybe getting a wide receiver 2 there, and then you could wait for a little bit, but I wouldn't wait, till rounds 15, 16. Don't make that mistake. But if you don't land that top guy, what I saw as a viable strategy, what I've done, what I've seen others in the industry do, I kind of like waiting until that round 6 to 10 pocket right there. And there's some really intriguing wide receivers that you don't have to spend round 2 and 3 draft capital for, but there's a good pocket in there, and we'll discuss some of those wide receivers. Yep. And then you just lock in like boom, 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 those 3 or 4 rounds right in a row. You get your top 2 to 3 starters there. So if I'm not locking in that anchor wide receiver at the top, round 6 to 10 is a good pocket of solid receivers there to draft them.
Yeah, I was gonna say the one thing I say about drafts is it's not really a science, it's more of an art. It's like how you build it, and I say that because you have to play it as you're dealt it, right? It's hard to have that. You could have your plan in place leading into a draft or going into a draft. But when players start coming off the board, man, you kind of have to shape shift a little bit and you've got to pivot. And so I'm with you. I want one of the top guys. If I can't get them early, I'd like to have at least an anchor receiver within the top 5 rounds. I think it's fair to say, like, give me a couple of running backs. I'll take a receiver maybe by that 4th pick at worst fifth. I want to be able to get at least one of those good mid-tier receivers. But to your point, the running backs have been going early. If the good quarterbacks don't go early, you could sit on those. You're getting good value with receivers in the 5 to 10 range. So we're going to go there. So, and this is a little different, right? Because we're talking strategy at receivers, Mike, where when we think about full FBS leagues, those four names that we mentioned, Smith, Tony, Messer, Sparks, once when you get outside of those four, it's really debatable on whether or not a receiver is going to come off the board inside the first 2 rounds other than those four. All right. They could, but they may not. So now all of a sudden, after those four, we're likely looking at rounds 3+ before the next crop of receivers start coming off the board. When we think about that, we could be ranging anywhere from wide receiver 5 to wide receiver 20. What 25? What? Let's throw out a couple of names, guys that we're kind of eyeing in some of the drafts after the top 4 that we seem to be leaning into in some of our drafts.
Yeah, I'll start with Bryant Wesco, the Clemson wide receiver. He's one that I feel like it was, I don't know, he was in the rounds like 6, 7, 8 range maybe at the start of the offseason, and he's kind of hovered there for the most part. Talent-wise, we know he's probably around 2 or 3 wide receiver, but I think it's the question marks obviously at quarterback is what is holding folks from drafting him higher than where he's going. So when I talked about that round 6 to 10 pocket where I do like to target, either a wide receiver 2 or hit on my wide receiver 1 through 3, I think Bryant Wesco is an excellent option in there. The notion for me coming out of this spring with Bryant Wesco, and really we'll talk about it later too, probably with TJ Moore. They hired Chad Morris as the offensive coordinator. I was like, okay, this guy hasn't been an offensive coordinator since 2020, right? Hasn't called plays since then at the collegiate level. So can we really take some of his system stats and apply that here? But if you do look back, like he has really peppered his outside receivers. If you look back at SMU when he had Cortland Sutton, right? Trey Quinn back in the day at SMU, both 1,000-yard receivers, both outside receivers. They played on the boundary too. So, it was talked about during the spring that they really want to try and stretch the field vertically this year. And that really fits Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore. Both averaged, I think, over 15 yards per reception last year. So the other part that I like about Bryant Wesco too, and really TJ Moore, outside of that, I don't think they have a slot receiver this year like Antonio Williams last year, who had 72 targets in 10 games. Like they have Tyler Brown, I think, going to start in the slot this year, but he has done next to nothing since his freshman season. So I think it's going to be a centralized target share around Wesco and TJ Moore this year. So I do like that, as long as we get the quarterback to perform at an adequate level this year. I think that's all we need from the Clemson quarterback.
Yeah, for me, and it's a guy that's in my top 10, but he's outside of the top 4. You and I, there's about a 5-point difference between the rankings we have. And it's Wyatt Young for Oklahoma State. And the reason I like Wyatt Young is, Caleb Hawkins and Drew Mestemaker, they're getting all the attention with Eric Morris going over there to Oklahoma State. And here's my take. Oklahoma State's going to be good. They're going to be better. They're not going to be as bad as they were last year. Morris brings over a slew of talent, but he brings over his top receiver, his top running back, and his top quarterback. I don't see Oklahoma State dominating, so they're still going to have to throw the ball around a lot. And you and I spoke about this yesterday when we were talking on the phone. The Big 12 is going to be fun this year, man, and I could see where there's going to be maybe 4 or 5 teams in contention for possibly being in that title game with 1 or 2 games to go. I don't think Oklahoma State's going to dominate. I think they're going to be good. And so what I do think is that's going to present a lot of opportunities for Mestemaker in the passing game. And look, Wyatt Young, 70 receptions, 1,200 yards, double-digit touchdowns last year. And the quarterback and the coordinator are the same. I love the continuity there. The competition's going to be different, but there's a little bit of security knowing, you and I talk about it all the time, whether or not the proof is in the pudding. And Young's a guy that's done it, put up the numbers, and he's back. Same quarterback, same head coach, same system, just different uniform.
Yeah, where do you have him ranked? I know I have
7.
Wyatt. Okay, I have 12
Yeah.
for Wyatt Young, and we've talked about this. I think we both agree that the passing game should thrive again this year with Messi Maker, moving up to the to Big 12 and probably in some shootouts this year. I think my biggest concern, and we've talked about this on the phone, what have you, is that they brought in so many transfers, right?
Yeah.
Justin Bowick from Illinois, Chris Barnes, very talented player from Wake Forest. There was a slew of other guys that they brought in. So I am always tentative when you have that many new pieces and that it just could shuffle the order a little bit. Everything that you laid out makes sense. Maybe he's just one that that we have this every year, guys that have been proven in the past that we just overthink a little bit too much. We talked about Bo Jackson this past episode, right? Or there's maybe Wyatt Young is somebody that I'm overthinking a little bit too much.
Yeah, and look, and I'll throw out my second one too because it's a guy that I have in the top 15, and I think had he been fully healthy last year, there might be a little bit more hype behind him this year. But I still think DeCorian Moore for Oregon. I still like him. I've got him at the 13th spot. You're about, I think, 8 spots down with him at about 21, and I'll tell you why I just have him where he's at. Right. We know the offensive coordinator's gone. Will Stein's off to Kentucky, right? But there's going to be continuity in the program, at least with the personnel as well. You get the quarterback back. Dante Moore is coming back, and I just feel with between DeCorian Moore and Jamari Johnson at tight end, that's a really good core in the passing game, and I just feel that Moore is going to be healthy this year. I see him being the primary target in the passing game. And I know I don't want to draw comparisons here because it's going to be a little bit different. But we talked about how much we love Malachi Tony because he's a playmaker. DeCorian Moore has shown signs of being that shifty playmaker in space when he gets the ball. And I'm wondering if they try to get him the ball in space and he stays healthy this year. Oregon's going to be very good again, right? And so, again, a player that played most of the year last year, flashed his talent. He's back, year number 2, proven quarterback on a good team. That's why I like DeCorian Moore. I feel like there's a little bit of I know what I'm getting with him at number 13.
Yeah, it's interesting the two guys that we have picked for our guys that we wanted to talk about because you are picking players from teams that are going to probably better offenses than the receivers that I'm choosing. But I can see the differences where you're choosing guys where clearly Wyatt Young, DeCorian Moore, very talented, but I get worried about the mouths to feed, right? You still have Jeremiah McClellan there. You still have an Evan Stewart who, according to the spring is looking like the 5-star self, right? So it's just an observation that I've seen.
And you know what? And it's something that I guess it's kind of coming to a head now that we're talking about it here. So it's good to see. It's good for other people to see how our conversations have evolved because this is something we spoke about last year, particularly at the wide receiver position where sometimes we do overanalyze it and sometimes it is good to have the security of this guy's done it. And sometimes that can be a good thing in sort of best ball formats where you're looking for that consistency over time too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Second guy that I wanted to discuss was David Amador from UTSA. Yep. I locked him in round 4 in the Kings Classic full point PPR. Health has clearly always been the biggest issue. He's been nicked up the last 2 years, but there's over 200 vacated targets, right? Devin McCune off to Ohio State. They lose those guys at tight end, Patrick Overmeyer, Houston Thomas. And what I really like, a couple of things I really like. One, there's not a ton of competition in that room, at least on the surface that we know about, right? AJ Wilson popped late in the year, probably going to be the wide receiver 2, but outside of that, it's a lot of unproven transfers coming from P4 destinations. Yep. Maybe they pop, but a lot of unproven, uncertainty there. So I'm pretty certain that Amador is going to be the wide receiver one there. Now they have a new offensive coordinator, Rick Bowie, coming over from Western Kentucky. Previously coached at Valdosta State and one other school in the last 3 or 4 years that I'm not remembering. But if you look back, two 1,000-yard receivers in 2023, 2024, both played in the slot. That's where David Amador is going to play. Katie Hutchinson last year for Western Kentucky with Bowie calling the plays. He only had 618 yards, but he was targeted 85 times. So it's a high volume spot in this system. And the other part is too, where it's like, okay, we're questioning, who is going to be that wide receiver two outside of Amador here. They peppered those tight ends with targets the past years. You listen to the G5 Hive episode, and the UTSA beat writer, he doesn't think they're going to target the tight ends much at all in that offense this year. So I really think it's going to be wide.
Well, they're all unproven, right? I mean, they had to bring in a slew of tight ends.
Yeah, and the beat writer basically indicated it's not going to be the same usage that we've seen in years past with those tight ends. So I think they're going to funnel targets to the wide receivers, and Amador is going to be the wide receiver one there.
So when we look at the range that we were just mentioning, what's the name on your list? A guy that you've just passed over, you just there's just something there that you're finding it's not there's no appeal.
Yeah, I like to trigger our good friend Josh Chevalier, who is a Miami fan, but I'm also known as a Miami hater. But it is Cooper Barkate. Yes, it all makes sense, right? It's going to be a high-powered offense at Miami. He's got obviously great rapport with Darian Mensah, who is coming over to Miami from Duke. They're going to be one of the highest scoring offenses in the ACC, maybe in the country. But if you look back in that offense, you look at wide receiver twos in that offense last 3 seasons, you've got in total points scored, you got a wide receiver 59, a wide receiver 68, and last year, wide receiver 112. Like, is that worth a top 7 round pick?
Yeah.
Maybe Darian Mensah goes nuclear a la Cam Ward a couple years ago, but I don't see that when they've got like a stable of 4 really solid running backs, right? I think it's going to be a balanced offense for Miami this year. So, I could be wrong on Cooper Barkate. He's obviously a really good player, showed it last year for Duke, but they got a lot of weapons there at Miami. Obviously, Tony brought in Cam Vaughn. Vandrevius Jacobs from South Carolina, Joshua Moore, the sophomore, he popped in the spring too. So a lot of targets there. I just don't know that Cooper Barkate's going to be worth a top 7 pick.
Yeah, there's one for me. I have him at wide receiver 15, but I just don't have any shares of him. And for some reason I'm nervous, and a little bit goes into what you talk about. Mouths to feed. I'm just not sure. But it's Jordan Dwyer over at TCU. Man, I hate passing on Dwyer thinking he could be that TCU wide receiver one, but I'm not 100% sold that they're not going to spread it around a little bit, and he's the one that I'm a little hesitant. And look, last year he was probably their second best receiver, right? But does he
I would say
have
definitely.
does he have the pedigree to take over? Does he have it in him to be the wide receiver one for the Horned Frogs this year? And that's where I'm not sold yet. And so, I've just shied away and gone with another name or two right next to him when I've been on the clock around that range.
Yeah, I've been I have him as a top 10 wide receiver, so I obviously think highly of him, but I can see the hesitation with him. And TCU is one of those teams that has started up fall camp already. And if you've been in the CFF site Discord, we've posted some notes that Ed Small, the slot receiver, has been killing it so far in the spring, in fall camp. And then Dozie Ezukama, I think brother of Eric Ezukama. You remember him from the Texas Tech a couple years ago. He's been popping in fall camp reports too. So maybe there's a couple other options where they kind of spread it around this year for TCU.
As we get outside of the top 40, Mike, now we're starting to get in those 10 plus rounds as we get into wide receiver 40, or maybe outside to 8, depending on the depth of your draft, right? Couple of receivers outside the top 40 or around that top 40 range that you kind of like, that you've been magnetized. too.
Yeah. So these are the guys that I was talking about at the start. If I lock down that top guy in the
Yep.
first round, these are the guys in that 7, 8, 9 round range that I've been hammering. Deuce Alexander for Ole Miss. I think we know that offense
Yep.
is going to be really good with Trinidad Chamberlain still. They do have, Lane Kiffin's not there. The previous offensive coordinator's not there, but they do bring in John David Baker from East Carolina, who did coach under Lane Kiffin for 3 years as a pass game coordinator, I believe, maybe 1 year as an offensive coordinator for Ole Miss. Very familiar with, the situation
Yep.
there, having coached there. And you look at Deuce Alexander, highly efficient last year, 65% catch rate. He had 44 receptions on 68 targets, averaged over 15 yards per catch. Here's a nugget. They gave him the number 1 jersey for Ole Miss this spring, and that apparently means something. I don't exactly know what, but it does mean something, because if you look back at the last 4 receivers that had the number 1 jersey, Deshaun Stribling, Jonathan Mingo, AJ Brown, Laquan Treadwell, all obviously highly touted college fantasy receivers back in the day. So I take that stuff and I attribute it to my ranking, whether it has some merit or not. I do. You like to hear that stuff when it comes to receivers like that. So, but real quick, John David Baker, he obviously had Anthony Smith last year for East Carolina, was a top 20 fantasy receiver in total points scored, went over 1,000 yards in 13 games. Typically, it's the boundary receiver that pops in this offense, and that's obviously what Deuce Alexander is going to be.
I think you've got a couple of things working for you with Alexander. One, I don't think we're going to see the ball spread around as much as we did last year when Kiffin was head coach, right? Um, and because so much returns, you've got Chambliss back, you've got Lacey back, you've got the core back. He's going to need a go-to target for sure, and so I think that plays into Alexander's hands, and so I really like that one. I know you've been on that one for quite some time. Any other name there? One
Yeah.
more?
Just one more quick.
Yeah.
Trey Richardson. I think people were cautious, obviously, and for good reason at the start of the offseason, because he was coming off foot surgery in the offseason, but and he didn't practice in the spring, but the coaching quotes from Jeff Brom at media days said he's 100% healthy, he's ready to go. The hesitation, in addition to that, was the fact that he's a slot receiver. And we know in Jeff Brom's offenses, it's typically the outside guy, right? I think it's 11 out of the last 12 years where it's been the outside guy as the wide receiver 1. But Trey Richardson, I believe, is the best wide receiver on this roster. They have Trayshawn Hurry. They have Luane McCoy, who transferred in from Florida State. They were fine in spring camp based on the reports, but nobody really popped to where they might challenge for that wide receiver 1 designation. Could still happen, but I believe it's Trey Richardson, and he's steadily moving up over the course of the offseason now that we know he's healthy.
When we were planning the script for this, I almost wrote down Richardson as well. So glad I went with a couple of different names, but I'm with you on Richardson. I just, the value in that offense too, just can be so consistent if he's that go-to guy. I've got a couple of names, and they're both in the 40s I have. And the first guy I have is 43, and it's going to sound like a broken record, but there's just something about SMU that is magnetizing to me this year. I just think a very healthy Kevin Jennings does make them a different offense. We know they brought in Raphael over from Cal, but he's going to need a number 1 target. You've got Yamir Knight there, who caught 54 passes last year. So again, you've got a quarterback receiver combo that hooked up 54 times last year. And so remember, we're not talking about wide receiver 1. We're talking about value here, 40 and beyond, where, hey, they've got some consistency here. You're going to get some steady production. I like Yamir Knight for SMU, and a guy that I really love. For some reason, this might be one of my bigger sleeper receivers in the 40s, but I think Jaron Tibbs from Kansas State is going to have a really big year with Colin Klein there as the offensive coordinator. We saw what the receivers did for him at A&M last year, and I think Tibbs has potential to be that wide receiver 1 in that Kansas State offense. We know they're going to feature the run. If Avery Johnson just improves a tad bit, I think Jaron Tibbs is a guy that could have a really good year. He caught 47 passes last year for 595 yards. I think he was Kansas State's second leading receiver. He probably gets bumped up to wide receiver one, and I don't think 800 yards and 800 to 1,000 yards is out of question for Jaron Tibbs. It's a guy that I really like under the radar this year at Kansas State.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys that, I tried to target early in the offseason in particular because we knew for a fact that he was going to be, if not the one, he was going to be the wide receiver two or,
Yep.
whichever, right? And there's just a guy that we knew, hey, you are solidified in that top two. It's going to be a pretty good offense, obviously, with the coach and the experienced quarterback. And just, you're not chasing these, maybe a higher upside guy who, by week one is not even a starter on the depth
Yeah.
chart, right?
Yeah. Anybody around that range, Mike? Not that look that we're kind of shying away from because once when you get to the 40s, you're kind of drafting your guys. But anybody stick out to you a little bit of somebody that you see others taking that you like, I just don't get it?
Jace Brown, and we talked about this last night. Actually, I think
Yep.
we made the swap in the guide to Jackson Harris as the secondary option behind Winnie Watkins. And that honestly, that's not set in stone, right? Jace Brown could end up being the wide receiver one. Nobody's disputing that, but just the lack of buzz that Jace Brown received in the spring. If you listen to the summer school episode with Bud Elliott, he wasn't even mentioned at all as a
Yeah.
potential, top option. It was Trades Green, it was Winnie Watkins, and it was Jackson Harris mentioned, not Jace Brown. So, he started off the season, back in March as a top 6, 7 round pick. You still see that in some drafts. Um, but he's fallen. I think my most recent best ball, he went in round 11. So that's a range where I feel a little bit more comfortable taking him. But I'm not in on that because, and here's another thing. I've spoken to this already. They brought in so many transfers that can go in so many different directions when you bring in
Yeah.
6, 7 new guys, right? So that's just a guy I've just shied away from this year.
For me as a guy, it seems like I've been on this train for 2 years and I wanted to like him this year because Bryles comes in at offensive coordinator at South Carolina, but it's just Nick Harbor. I mean, he was a deep threat last year. You wonder if he's going to be any better in this offense, but it feels like for 2 years, all we've been talking about is his talent and his speed and his size, but he's never really done anything unless you had him in a best ball league last year. You probably got about 3 or 4 good weeks from him, but he's a guy that I have up there that quite honestly, I'm the talent level in Bryles' offense is the reason why he's up there. But man, I'm just not sure we're ever going to see it. And I'm like, man, maybe it's shame on me for putting him around that 50 mark. But I feel like someone has to emerge in that offense. But look, we're also making the assumption that Sellers is going to be better than he was last year, and he was poo poo last year. So
Poo poo.
he was.
Yeah, he was. I have several rules in college fantasy, and I broke it last year by ranking Lenore Sellers as a top three quarterback, which obviously did not pan out well for me, for anybody. But I can't trust South Carolina players. It's one of my rules that maybe it changes this year with Kendall Briles calling plays, but I just can't trust anybody that comes from that school. It's broken us a few times in
Yeah.
college fantasy over the years.
What about once when we get into the 60 range, my deeper
Yeah.
range? Let's give everybody a name or two that is on our radar, guys that we're looking at 60 plus. We're getting them in the back end of the drafts. These are guys we're taking stabs with that has the upside, but it's a little bit of a chance. They may be on our roster come week 2. They may not, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know we have the same player here. You can expand on this if I miss anything, but Cole Weaver for Syracuse, great news is that Steve Angeli is going to be healthy by all accounts for week 1. So we know that offense is going to throw the ball 400, maybe 500 times. I mean, he
Yeah.
was leading all FBS in passing through 4 weeks before that injury last year. So, and we've seen it 2 years, really. If you go back to 2024 with Kyle McCord, they threw the ball to 60% clip, right? So this is what they want to do. Yet nobody's taking any of their wide receivers until beyond round 20. Somebody is going to pop. I think Cole Weaver is at least going to be a top 2 option there. Miami of Ohio transfer had 45 receptions last year. He's 6'3", 220 pounds, and the talk coming out of the spring is that he's going to be used as kind of a big slot,
Yes.
A la Oronde Gadsden. Now, he doesn't obviously have the tight end eligibility that Gadsden did, but that's still 100+ targets that he received that year. It's not free, but it's essentially free if you're getting him, beyond round 20, round 25. So that's just a guy that I've gravitated towards. He might be wide receiver 2. I know Amari Hatcher made some waves in the spring too, but I like Cole Weaver for the value that you can get.
Yeah, what's interesting, when you think slot receivers, we traditionally think smaller, shiftier guys, right? And so we brought up KD Hutchinson for Western Kentucky's name up earlier in the show. PPR magnet, but he's not exactly a red zone target, right? And so when you've got somebody like Weaver with his size, he doesn't offer the shiftiness between the numbers as a playmaker does like that, or like Malachi Tony does at Miami. But he definitely gives Angeli a big target in the numbers, inside the numbers, and probably stays in the game when they're in the red zone as well. So, that guy's a goal line to goal line receiver when he's in the game, in my opinion, at that size.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we probably both agree that Syracuse is going to be trailing in several of their games this year, if they're not heavily improved based off last year.
And the other name, I've got 2 quick ones I'm going to throw out here because I kind of pivot a little bit when I realized we both had Cole Weaver. I do think Rashid Williams over at Washington with Damon Williams obviously going to be slinging it around. We've got Desmond Roebuck there as well. I think there needs to be a solid wide receiver 2 in that offense. Williams, I believe, was hurt most of last year. If he can stay healthy this year, I think he gives that offense a good number 2 option. And the one, I hate to say this, man, I was going to throw this out, but now I'm getting cold feet again. And a little bit is just Brandon Inniss over at Ohio State. I just know Ohio State has to have a good second option. They bring in a ton of transfers. You've got Chris Henry Jr. there as well. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, you've got an offensive coordinator now who's in his 5th year, right? And the one tidbit that I can offer you is that Inniss went out and supposedly made a prediction that he was going to be a 1,000-yard receiver this year. I don't know if you saw that, but he made that prediction. But this offensive coordinator in his 5th year has only produced, I think, maybe one 1,000-yard receiver in his 5 years as offensive coordinator, and that was A.J. Brown, who went for 1,075 when he was the offensive coordinator with the Tennessee Titans. So this is going to be a run-heavy system, no doubt about that. But, man, I just don't see Ohio State. I don't see Inniss challenging 1,000 yards, and so I know earlier on or coming out of spring, I was like, man, there has to be a solid wide receiver 2 in that Ohio State offense. Yeah. But that may be the one offense where we see the revolving door of players at the wide receiver 2 spot. And they're all probably keeping the seat warm for Chris Henry Jr. anyway. And it'll be interesting to see if at some point before the end of the year, we get Smith and Henry on the field at the same time.
I mean, that's going to be likely. I just correct you quick. It's Arthur Smith's 1st year calling plays.
Calling plays. OC. Okay. Well, I thought
but
did he not do it when he was at the NFL?
Oh, yeah, but it's his 1st year at Ohio State. That's all I meant.
First year at Ohio State, 5th year coordinator, but he's only done it at the pro level. So anyway, it was just not. We're comparing apples to oranges, but still, it's not like he's got a 1,500-yard receiver on his resume or 2 1,000 in the same year. So, any other players for you, Mike, around that range that you wanted to bring up before we kind of kick it over a little bit to tight ends and then close it back out with receivers again?
I'll highlight one more guy that I'm on, and then a couple that I'm actively fading. Adrian Norton from Marshall, again, rounds 20 plus in best ball. He's not the same player as DeMarcus Lacey was last year, who nearly had 100 targets, but like he finished the wide receiver one for Marshall last year, finished with 97 targets, average over just about 16 fantasy points per game. And Norton obviously was highly successful at Akron before transferring over to Marshall. Didn't translate year one, but he really closed on a high note. He had 2 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks, and then he had that perfect, 8 targets, 8 receptions for 160 yards in the finale. I think he's locked into that wide receiver one there at Marshall. Two guys that I'm off on. One has really kind of fallen off the radar. But Javon Tracy for Minnesota, I just don't think there's going to be a guy this year for Minnesota like we've seen in years past with Daniel Jackson. He finished as wide receiver 2 last year, wasn't really that efficient. And I think the Minnesota beat writer made a prediction in an article that it would be Noah Jennings as the leading receiver for Minnesota this year. So yeah, I'm off of that Javon Tracy with Minnesota. And then one, I don't understand Chris Durr at all. Transferring over from Wyoming to Maryland. He is super small, super skinny, coming over from a G5 location in Wyoming to Maryland. We do know that Maryland's going to sling the ball, but you're going to need high volume with a 5'10 receiver. And outside of the, who was it a couple of years ago? Ty Felton. Outside of the Ty Felton year 2 years ago, they spread it around under Mike Locksley between the tight ends, multiple receivers. So I don't see a Wyoming transfer getting a high volume of targets. He's not going to get red zone targets at 5'10". So I'm not understanding why he's drafted really at all.
Yeah. So look, before we come back to receiver, and we're going to get there because we're going to talk about teams we're keeping eyes on, and we're also going to compare some wide receiver 1 to 2s. Where's the value? We're going to come back to that, but let's skip over to tight ends before we wrap this up with the receivers, Mike. Let's just throw out a couple of names that you and I both like. They could be anywhere on the board because, again, tight end's one of those positions where some people may play tight end, some people may not. Look, man, go where you want with this one. What's a couple of names you're looking at tight ends? Maybe guys you've targeted a little bit more frequently than others in some of your drafts.
Yeah, I'm becoming repetitive with this one, but Willie Rodriguez for Kentucky. Will Stein, the new head coach, came out at SEC Media Days, basically said that Willie Rodriguez was one of the first players that they prioritized, after getting hired to retain on the roster. So probably gave him, a good chunk of change to stay. And then he was quoted, Will Stein, by saying like, hey, this guy is as good as Kenyon Sadiq, as Terrence Ferguson from Oregon a couple of years ago. And this will apply to the next tight end that I talk about, but I really like targeting tight ends as part of my strategy that I feel could potentially lead the team in receiving. And if not lead their team in receiving, just be on a roster where there's a ton of questions at wide receiver. And I think that applies to Kentucky, right? We have DJ Miller projected as the wide receiver 1, but he did, maybe had one good game last year, didn't do much outside of that. Nick Anderson is, he's probably injured at this point right now because he's been injured like the last 2 or 3 years. And then there's not much depth beyond that, or at least proven depth at this level. So really like Willie Rodriguez and the value that you can get him at. He still really hasn't jumped that much in ADP since the start of the offseason. Real quick, the other one, same logic applies, but Eli Finley at Louisiana Tech. I think he's their top pass catching option, right? Ton of questions at wide receiver. We have no idea who's necessarily going to be the solidified wide receiver 1. And I think the underrated part about Eli Finley is that Louisiana Tech named Blake Baker as their starting quarterback heading into this year. And he is a massive upgrade over Trey Kukuk, who was a running back playing quarterback last year and couldn't get that. The passing game was not functional with him at quarterback. So having
Yeah.
Blake Baker really helps that passing game for Louisiana Tech.
And Eli Finley is one of those guys that, first of all, I like to say the law of averages comes back to catch him, and I
Yes.
have him in some drafts as well. He led the team in 38 receptions last year. He just didn't catch a touchdown pass.
No.
He catches 38 passes this year, 38 to 45 passes. I'd say he probably is going to hit the end zone 3 or 4 times.
Yep,
So we'll see.
absolutely.
I really like that. I've got a couple of names I throw out. One on the top end, one kind of in the middle. But I like Dylan Wade over at Central Florida. I just really like him. I think he's a great pass catching tight end. Central Florida upgraded the quarterback position with bringing in Alonzo Barnett this year, so they should have stability at the quarterback position. And he probably becomes their top red zone target as well, or remains their top red zone target. So, and UCF is probably going to be one of those middle Big 12 teams where they're going to be in every game and they're probably going to be throwing around trying to play catch up with everybody else in the Big 12 track meet that we'll see in some of these games. The other name that I'll throw out there as well is I really feel that Walker Lyons for BYU can have a breakout year this year. He caught 20 passes for USC last year. The highly touted tight end, number one tight end recruit in the nation, Mark Bowman, comes into USC. Walker Lyons goes to BYU. We know that BYU is going to probably be one of the top teams in the Big 12. You've got Bear Backmeyer returning at quarterback. You've got LJ Martin, rock steady running back right there. But when it comes to receivers at BYU, things are a little bit shuffled right now. There's not a lot of identity right there. Now, Carson Ryan caught 45 passes in this offense last year. I'm not saying Walker Lyons is going to do that, but man, I can see where he can hit the 30+ mark with the way that they get Bear Backmeyer to manage this offense with running the ball using LJ Martin. I think Walker Lyons could be one of those sneaky tight ends in the middle to late rounds for you.
Yeah, 100%. I recall in the spring they called the two transfers, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce the Oregon transfer's last name. But they said that those two guys were the best offensive players in the spring for BYU. So you really like to hear that, those spring reports coming out.
Any name that we're staying away from, Mike? Because I have a feeling we may land on the same name for tight ends. Just maybe not we're staying away, just throwing up a little bit of a caution flag.
Yeah, it's just a Cal tight ends, Dorian Thomas, Mason Minnie, and just, I mean, they're actually so cheap now that I think they're almost becoming a value at this point because their ADP has dropped so much since the start of the offseason, but it's just the unknown there, right? We have no idea what that scheme is going to look like for Cal this year. Jordan Somerville is the new offensive coordinator, came over from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers where he's a quarterback's coach. So he has not called plays at any level, to my understanding, to this point. So we have no idea what the scheme is going to look like. And that's what we do in CFF, right? We look at the tendencies and the schemes and try and use that towards our projections. So great players, very talented, but there's two of them, and we don't know what the scheme's going to look like. So I'm just hesitant in that sense.
Well, you're also looking at an offense that's trying to build they're trying to find an identity. They're going to build it around the quarterback, right? They bring in, I think they brought in Muhammad at running back from Washington.
Correct. Yep.
But they also brought in Ian Strong from Rutgers. They brought in Chase Hendricks, the receiver from Ohio. You've got Mason Minnie there as well, which I think he missed most of the spring. But there was even talks of another tight end that they were praising as well. And all of a sudden now you kind of stop and think. Dorian Thomas comes in, caught 56 passes at New Mexico last year. But man, he's just one of 5 guys that they could target in that passing game this year. So I'm with you. There's a player that you and I are kind of aligned on, and I've got him ranked still high, even though his ADP value has plummeted, because there's value there if he goes off. But tight end's one of those positions where you kind of have to hit or miss. And then if not, you're probably getting one of those guys off the waiver wire. But he's a guy that I'd kind of wave the caution flag on. He's got the potential, but we haven't seen the system or the offense or know if there's an identity for him to even get close to anywhere near 56 catches again in 2026 with all the receivers that they brought in.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that in the past. There's players that we have ranked highly that we just don't gravitate towards, right?
Yep.
For whatever reason. And Dorian Thomas, that's just one of those players this year.
Now let's get back to receiver, Mike. First of all, let's do this. Fun little back and forth here. Where's the value at? Would you rather Cam Coleman for Texas, or would you rather pass where he's being taken and get Ryan Wingo a little bit later? What are your thoughts on that Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo situation at Texas?
So it's terrible to say because it's going to be such a good offense, but I haven't drafted either player at all this offseason. So let me just set the stage a little bit. So Cam Coleman, wide receiver 8 in ADP, Ryan Wingo, wide receiver 40. In the Kings Classic, I believe there was a 9 to 10 round difference between the two. Should there be? I don't know. I think Cam Coleman is obviously the more talented player of the two, but you got to go up in round 3 to get him. And we've already seen Ryan Wingo do it last year for the most part, right? Had 100 targets
Yep.
in 13 games played.
Probably should have had 300 more yards if Arch Manning was if he wasn't poo poo for the first half of the year
And,
last year.
and Ryan Wingo dropped passes too.
Yep.
Everybody's kind of to blame there. But I would go Wingo just because I don't want to spend round 3 draft capital on a player in Cam Coleman where I think the targets are going to be spread around, right? You have Coleman, you have Wingo, you have Emmett Mosley, who's going to start in the slot, right? And we talked about this yesterday. The reports are that they are going to use Raleek Brown and Hollywood Smothers in the passing game more than this year than they did the wide receivers or running backs last year. So I just think they are going to spread it around. And if you're going to spread it around, I'd rather take the cheaper player in Ryan Wingo.
I'm with you. There's something inside of me that has a feeling that maybe Ryan Wingo is going to outperform where his ADP is, and those numbers are going to be a little bit closer to 50-50. So we'll
And
see.
when we do this, like we're not poo pooing. Oh, God, we
No.
said we should title this article poo pooing because we said that 2 or 3 times in this. But like we're not diminishing the talent of the player. We just feel like Ryan Wingo is a better value, right?
No, I just look, here's the deal. Where receivers are coming off the board, I'm not taking Cam Coleman right now, but where I can get Wingo a little bit few rounds later and I can get my other running back or QB2 where some players are taking Cam Coleman, I'm going to go ahead and pass and punt and get Ryan Wingo a little bit later. Now, we have a few more of these. Ryan Coleman Williams at Alabama. Let's see, or Brooks as well. And I think this goes into whether or not you believe that Coleman Williams is going to have a bounce back year for Alabama. And much like we talked about with Wingo, too, he had drop balls last year. He probably could have had another 250 yards receiving. Is that player going to come back that we saw as a true frosh? Or is Brooks a more steady receiver? We would rather have him in that offense.
Yeah, Ryan Coleman Williams is wide receiver 17 in ADP. Latsier Brooks is wide receiver 37. There was a 6 round difference between the two in the Kings Classic. I'm actually fine, and this could backfire, but I'm actually fine if you want to select both players. And it's of my opinion that I don't think Alabama has a really good receiving tight end this year. And the dynamic changed when Noah Rogers, the NC State transfer, went down in the spring. I don't know that they have a legit wide receiver 3. Of course, they've got 5-star freshmen coming in, Sedarian Morgan, right? Derek Meadows, redshirt freshman, I believe. He kind of popped a little bit, but they don't have a legit dude as the wide receiver 3 as where Texas, where they have Emmett Mosley, who is a proven playmaker right there. So I'm fine taking both because I think it's going to be a condensed target share with those two. I would take the value in Latsier Brooks. It's a 6 round difference for the most part between the two. So, but I'm fine with either, to be honest with you.
So I'm with you. If I had the preference, I prefer the upside ceiling of Coleman Williams. The value to me is in Brooks, but the upside is in Coleman Williams if he can produce those big plays. So I've got no problem with either guy, but I would prefer to have Coleman Williams in this instance because I think he offers greater upside.
Yeah, and just real quick,
Yeah.
if we want to translate that to past years, like Kalen DeBoer, like remember when he had those Washington years? They had
Yeah.
three guys
Yes.
who popped for 800 plus yards. So if the quarterback play is what we think it could be with Keelan Russell or maybe Austin Mack, like two wide receivers could pop here for 1,000 yards. That is well within the range of possibilities.
Now, Indiana brings in Josh Hoover, the TCU transfer, right? So they also bring in Nick Marsh at receiver, but you've got Charlie Becker, who returns for Indiana. Let's compare Nick Marsh and Charlie Becker. Where would you rather be in with those two with where they're going, Mike?
So this one's, I mean, you listed five teams. This is the tightest of the bunch because Nick Marsh is wide receiver 12, Charlie Becker is wide receiver 14. There's really only a 1 round difference between the two. I prefer Nick Marsh just
Same.
personally because he is sliding into that X role that Elijah Surratt had the past 3 years in the system. And that was almost 300 targets over the last 3 years. So it's just, it's maybe a system play for me.
Yep.
But I have no qualms. If you want to lean Becker, that's fine too. They're both outstanding players.
Yeah, I nothing more to add there for me. Preference is Marsh, but again, we're splitting hairs. Both guys,
I,
close in
yeah,
ADP.
I was thinking about this too. Like if Fernando Mendoza was back, right? I might lean Becker because they have the relationship, right?
Correct.
But Josh Hoover's, it's all new. It's all new. Josh Hoover has not played with Charlie Becker either, too. So, that's the difference.
But then you didn't lean Wyatt Young because of Mesty Maker, and you didn't lean Decoria Moore because of Dante Moore. So,
but like I said,
no, I got to give you some crap here before we get out of here. All right, here's a good one. Here's a good one because we said Bo Sparks was top 4. But look, this was something we spoke about last year, Mike. Remember when we were planning, we were like, GJ Kinney said that Chris Don, and Bo Sparks were both likely going to be 1,000-yard receivers. And he was spot on. He got them both over 1,000 yards.
Yeah, you were the only one that I heard mention that quote. So that was a good find by you.
This year, Bo Sparks with where he's going or Chris Don?
Bo Sparks. This one's easy. I mean, like, these are tough. They're tough to answer because I really don't have an issue. If you miss out on Bo Sparks, go get Chris Don, right?
Yep.
What's interesting too is I haven't seen anybody take both of them. I don't think in a draft this year, which you could do that feasibly because Bo Sparks is a round 1 guy. Chris Don, for the most part, goes in round 3. But there was 50% target share and above for these two guys last year. There is no wide receiver 3 to speak of. At least, there wasn't last year. I don't know if that's necessarily.
No, there wasn't much of a wide receiver 3 at all in that offense last year.
No, and there's obviously no tight end that they throw to in this offense. They throw to the running backs a fair amount, but it's like last year was so condensed with the top 2 receivers that, again, I'll take Sparks just because I think he's the better player. He was more consistent. He obviously finished as the top, 5 to 10 receiver last year. But no issue with either guy.
And here's a good one. First of all, Sparks for me as well. But again, I'd love to see a Texas State stack at receiver out there if somebody's got that. Yeah. Bryant Wesco, Clemson, which is a guy that you mentioned earlier that you like, and TJ Moore as well. Both of these guys, like we mentioned earlier, they're probably going to be the top 2 targets in this offense. What do you have as far as ADP? What's your preference right now on where you would lean?
Yeah, Bryant Wesco, wide receiver 21 in ADP. TJ Moore, wide receiver 48 in ADP. There was a 8-round difference between the two in the Kings Classic. I am going to cheat and I say just you could draft both. I think it's very similar to Alabama. Like, just it's going to be a condensed target share. I don't think there's a legit wide receiver 3 slot receiver between them. But there's an argument to be made for both, right? Because Bryant Wesco was legitimately the wide receiver 1 for Clemson last year prior to the injury. But then if you look at Chris Vezina's one start, projecting that he's going to be the new starting quarterback, if you look at his start last year against SMU, it was TJ Moore who popped for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. So there's arguments to be made with both. I lean Wesco here because he was the wide receiver one last year up until that injury. But I'm big on both of those players this
Yeah, I
year.
like them both as well. If I had to lean one side or the other, at the end of the season, if one guy comes closer to hit the mark on where we have him ranked, I'd probably go more TJ Moore right now. I feel
Mhm.
like it's a little bit more of safety, whereas I think Wesco has that upside, but he could fall back and end up finishing a little bit closer to where TJ Moore is currently ranked. So I kind of lean TJ Moore right now. But again, to your point, I'd like,
If you
if
can't get one,
if
get the other,
quarterback
right?
hits there, they're
Yeah.
both going to be solid
Oh
options,
yeah. Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
What are we missing, man, before we get out of here at the receiver spot? If you wanted to put a bow on anything, because we're about to close shop here. Oh,
Yeah. Position
places
battles.
that our eyes are
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
in preseason camp. I mentioned at the top of the show. We're about to head into the this weekend included if it gets up before the weekend. The 4 weekends before the season starts are here. The biggest draft weekends of the college fantasy football season. There's a lot of names we haven't mentioned on here because there's also a few places where our eyes are kind of concentrated to see who's popping at wide receiver. I'll throw a few of them out there. Arizona State's one. Colorado's one where they brought in a bunch of receivers. You've got Danny Scudero, who had a breakout season at San Jose State last year. Mike, what are some other teams? Who are some other teams that we're looking at as we go through this preseason camp?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, I think everybody's going to be looking at San Jose
Yep.
State, like first and foremost, which, TBD if we can find legitimate like reporting on San Jose State this year. Love the G5 Hive, but that beat writer didn't provide any insight, any actionable insight as to who really is going to be the wide receiver one this year. So Anthony Ivy, Jerry McClure, Carson Clark, all in the mix, a few other names. So we'll be looking at that one. I like Arizona State too, right? Omari Miller, Reed Harris.
Yep.
Is somebody going to be Jordan Tyson? Are they going to split it between those two guys? That remains to be seen. Colorado, I'm kind of off on, just because I think that can easily backfire this year. But like they brought in three transfers. Sorry, Scudero, Cam Perry, uh, DeAndre Moore from Texas joining Joseph Williams. And it was good at UNLV, Brennan Marion and the go-go offense. But man, last year at Sacramento State, they just spread it around.
Yeah.
I don't think the top guy had more than 45 targets. So,
But
you got
historically it's shown it can produce a top tier college fantasy football receiver if they
correct.
settle on a go-to target.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are good ones. Um, Real quick hitters. East Carolina, right? They're going to throw the ball a ton. They're going to move at a fast pace. So, Brock Spalding, Ray Joseph, Landon Sides, who comes out there? Baylor is going to be interesting because we know they're going to probably throw a lot this year. Lewis Brown, Drela Miller, Gavin Freeman, those guys are in the mix. Florida International is Greg Gaines, the actual
Yeah.
wide receiver one. I think most, in the CFF community project that. But we want some, verification that he actually is. Ohio, I know we've talked about this at length. Ohio obviously has had a ton of production at a receiver over the years with, Chase Hendricks. Is it going to be Preston Bowman? Is it going to be Max Rodarte? Is it going to be anybody for Ohio this year? Two others, Georgia Southern, right? I think we both have
Yeah.
Josh Dallas as the wide receiver one there, but he's going to play in the slot most likely. And we saw last year with Camden Brown, it was that outside receiver. So maybe it's Ashton Hollins who transfers over from Illinois. Is it Andre Green who transfers over from North Carolina? And then the last one I had, Utah State, Anthony Garcia, Javon Robinson. Probably going to be one of those two as the top
Yeah.
guy. But we're not necessarily sure who that is to this point.
And you can be sure there'll be a couple of more that will
Yep.
break. There's a lot going on. All the teams
Yep.
are about to open up camp. We're about to get into the thick of things, Mike. This is going to do it for the third in the three-part series of the preseason preview series. We've been doing this now for the last few years. But like I said at the top of the show, we're going to come out with some quick hitters, some movers, shakers, guys that we're staying away from, tidbits from out from the camps around the country, man. So It's go time for us. We released the guide in June, and there's a little bit of a break where there's not too many updates. But it's the great thing when you come in and get the preseason fantasy draft guide. You come in at the All-American and Heisman tier and get those preseason projections. We are updating them all preseason camp long, leading up to about 5 to 6 days before the start of the season. Then we start flipping the page and turning our attention to week one. You've got all the DFS content as well. Man, we are back in full swing, man. So finally, we get this series done. We're going to get some quick hitters out of the way in the next couple of weeks. But it's go time. We're in the heart of college fantasy football draft season. 2026 is here. It's a week later than it was last year. So some of the drafts are a week later than they were last year, but we've got a long way to go over this next month. A lot of news to come in. And for my partner, Mike Bainbridge, my name is Joe DeSalvo. We'll see you guys soon. Till then.